Right, I'm Jane Shattock, and this is Stepping Stones to Awareness. And I'm just reading bits of my mother's dictation from the other side. And this one is about the planets, or about our planet and how it works, or a brief bit. There's so much, it's such a muddle trying to get it all together because her papers are in a terrible mess. So anyway, this chapter is only meant to try and describe the creation of the universe, the planets, and in as simple way as possible, so that older children can understand it, as after all they are the future and it is their world too. How does a planet work? This is something we should all understand, only in a fairly simplistic way, as the full complexity of natural things is really almost beyond complete understanding. Even the birth of a simple animal or the creation of any other living creature, including ourselves. The idea that a whole continent of earth, rocks, and all the other extraordinary weighty things that go up to make a huge area of land could simply slide about and form a liaison with some other continent, like the Isle of Wight, floating across the sea and landing up, crushed up against Southampton, indicates the utter ignorance of mankind as to how exactly the planet really works. Everyone knows that within all planets there is a huge area of fire, an inferno, and as we have already indicated, 4 very large computers and a dozen or so smaller ones. These are connected to the motivating engines which power the planet, as it constantly moves on its predestined course around the sun, turning always as it does, making night and day throughout the planet. Where the reader might ask, are these engines within the globe, which is the planet Earth, around the circumference perhaps? Once again, look at a small spinning top motivated by a handle with a thread. The ones that we had in my childhood, which went up and you pushed the thing and it spun. Motivated by a handle with a turned thread, which once pumped up and down would spin the top, until once the motivation has stopped, it will fall over sideways. Consider if the motivation of the top was at one side, or even both sides, it would be lopsided on one side, and 2 engines, if on both sides, would have to be perfectly synchronized to work at all well. No, like the child's top, the engines must all be down the central column of the earth, and all working perfectly together, based on a central column of fire and power. It's also been said that there are what looks like tubes or snakes within the centre of the earth. This is indeed so, as how else would the precious seawater, which is changed into hydrogen and oxygen, reach its destination to power the engines of the earth? Does it even occur to even the most eminent of stargazers that all things that need some sort of motivating force must have some sort of fuel? Only the various magnetic forces of other planets is not enough to keep it turning perfectly on its axis, moving in perfect accord, like the perfect flying machine that it is, on its predestined course. As we shall repeat over again throughout the book, all things are created in a similar way, and the planets and everything that relates to them is the same. Just like all living things, planet Earth must have begun its creation from the first spark of power and flame, which became the powerhouse, as a chicken's egg once broke open to reveal the vital speck, the nucleus, which becomes the chicken's brain and head, its powerhouse. And the head of a human being is the first part that forms after fertilization, which is of course the house of each and every human being, the powerhouse of each and every human being. Thereafter forms the skeletal frame, and all planets must have a skeletal frame similar, with a central column of power where all the motivating mechanisms are housed, and all around a framework of something very like the human skeleton which holds everything together. Human beings and all other living things, even including planets, have arteries or tubes where their vital life-giving juices circulate to keep them alive, and the planet is no different. As it must have water constantly circulating everywhere, it is needed to keep it alive also. Water, if you like, is the planet's lifeblood. All life as we know it relies upon it totally. If geologists and scientists were able to station a special movie camera about 3 miles away from this planet and leave it there for at least 3 months, taking a photograph at the same place and the same time every week for about half an hour, then join the pictures up, then speed them up to a half-hour picture, a great many things would begin to become apparent. The outer surface of the planet moves about as if something inside were on the move. This, of course, is not felt by us, the inhabitants of this earth, as it would indeed make life on earth extremely uncomfortable. As we have said already, everything bears relation to everything else, and just as the human body needs light, air and water constantly and needs to breathe rhythmically to remain alive, so does the planet also breathe or pulse. Careful observation will reveal this if the moving photography reveal this in the moving photography we suggest. Everybody knows that no fire will remain alight without oxygen. In the case of the fire within the planets, hydrogen also. Under the Earth, in some cases almost a mile from the surface, and in others far less than this, are vital water tables which help to regulate the temperature of the planet, which, should it become too great, starts to activate the computers immediately. Our planet is moving into this situation now. For some reason, it is always the North Pole which reacts first and allows some of the inner heat to rise and melt some of the polar ice. Eventually, both poles will melt entirely as the situation gets worse. The ice naturally flows into the seas, which begin to rise dramatically and force their way into the rivers and the underground waterways of the earth, especially where there are wide estuaries. Perhaps it is interesting to note that yesterday it was reported that an area of ice, this was a long time ago, perhaps it's interesting to note that yesterday there was an area of ice as large as the English county, which is now moving north, having broken away from the South Pole. I'll turn over the page. The next and very dramatic disasters take the form of serious earthquakes, most especially in the warmer regions of the earth where there is no vegetation. Huge storms of rain drench the parched earth, and seeds that will have remained ready to grow once more in the desert, dried out soils or sand will begin to germinate. Perhaps one can make an interesting comparison here between a seed that, stored in the dry, arid conditions, will keep forever and germinate perfectly once it finds itself in the correct warm, damp conditions with earth to feed it, and the soul or entity of all living creatures, including humans like ourselves, which lives forever, but will rise up once more as a living creature, even if it has had to remain in store for a very long time. Once it can grow within a new embryo within the Once it can grow within a new embryo within the body of its new mother. Indeed, new continents will be formed, but from within the planet, as the earth is pushed up in all manner of ways by tremors and explosions of all kinds, as the planet struggles to set itself to rights. If there are by this time no living creatures left, vegetation which is not being used anywhere runs riot, and you get a world which is so green that a huge freeze sets in, not only at both polar regions, but in vast areas in both northern and southerly. All the metals of the earth and many other substances not yet discovered by this world's people can be created from the various waters of the sea by atomic means, and are of course known: gold, copper, lead, tin, tungsten, iron, zinc, etc. And these, combined with granite, rock, chalk, clay of various sorts, are all combined together to make the very beautiful, it is believed, hexagonal-shaped mail or armour, the plates, which indeed do move, and must constantly do so in a very special and complicated way, to allow air and water to filter down inside the planet. Imagine the planet in its extremely delicate design and the place set for it as it goes constantly on its course around the sun. If enormous chunks on its surface suddenly started moving about of their own accord. Everything concerning all planets is all part of a great plan, and if anything whatsoever begins to go wrong, then they are so designed that their automation acts to put it right very quickly. Everyone, young or old, must realize that they live on a small Earth planet, by comparison with some others that exist elsewhere in the universe, which is a living, moving, breathing entity. Inside are the engines that power it constantly, and like all engines, they must have fuel constantly fed to them, most of which comes from the sea, as down in the depths of the sea are the special valves that let in the seawater to form the vital hydrogen and oxygen it cannot work without. Most readers will have read of the famous Michael Faraday, who discovered that he could separate water into hydrogen and oxygen by use of a simple battery. The water needed some salts added to it for this purpose. The sea, of course, has these salts in exactly the right proportions, a salt provided by the constantly dissolving bodies of some of its sea creatures. Michael Faraday, when he lived, could not think of a suitable use for this really important piece of knowledge, but our sister planet has of course known how to use it, and in its vast spaceships that ply between our two planets for a very long time. Many readers will ask, what about fallow planets like our moon, other moons, Venus and countless others? Do they work in the same way as a living planet, populated by many different types of people, when it has been proved by modern probes and photographs taken from great distances, hitherto impossible, that they are very different to planet Earth? Some planets, like the moon, which although a cold planet on the outer surface is fired inside, and although it does not revolve like the Earth does, it is controlled almost entirely by the forces all around it and needs very much less power than our Earth. It still has some gravitational pull sufficient for the very important task it does in helping to keep our Earth on its course, and must therefore have a spinning mechanism within its innermost parts to create this pull or power. All planets must have, otherwise nothing could work, as could be seen easily with a series of models set up in a laboratory. Planets like Venus could become inhabited in many millions of years, even though there is no evidence of any water anywhere, as it is also fired by its atmosphere of swirling explosive gases. It revolves as the Earth does, and is motivated in much the same way, but receives power from the circulating forces all around it in the universe. The holes clearly visible on the surface of the moon and other planets are not just holes left by crashing meteorites, but a sort of breathing apparatus for the inhalation and exhalation of all the vital gases which it needs to motivate it. All these gases, of course, contain oxygen and hydrogen, which could, if necessary, become water, the basis of all life. Without a huge area of seawater on the surface of the Earth, a fire-motivated planet must work in a different way, but in such a way that it can be changed in many millions of years to become a populated water-based planet. The elements are all there, but never ever a cold planet like our moon, which when our planet has ceased to function will explode with its mother planet. Not until a very large number of different types of algae can be developed on the surface of the Earth, which is the very beginning of life itself, can a completely fallow planet so slowly prepare itself for habitation. It's known that various sorts of laser types of mechanisms are used within the planetary engines to separate seawater into these two most explosive gases of oxygen and hydrogen. Somewhere I have a photograph in a book about UFOs of a small round craft sucking water up into itself from the surface of the sea somewhere. A photograph taken by an amazed amateur photographer. They know how to use seawater to motivate their various crafts and various types of nuclear power as yet unknown to our scientists and engineers. As we have mentioned already, once a planet is of no further use and must be disposed of, it is so designed that it will explode entirely. Even so, one of the greatest dangers for any exploration in outer space, however small, is the risk of rock from an exploded planet, not very often larger than the average-sized house, crashing into a spacecraft and destroying it. Almost never does anything crash into a planet that is large enough to really cause serious trouble. If a sculpture could create an exact replica of our Earth, covered all over with hexagonal plates, with its pressure plates, mainly situated around the equatorial regions, each plate being very beautiful, glittering all over with gold, precious and semi-precious stones, silver, green and beautiful colours and hues of all sorts caused by various metals, threaded through the rock and clay plates, it would be an extremely beautiful sight. We can never know, of course, what it really looks like, but the vein-like design is obviously so created that it will crumble to nothing when a new plate is required or the planet itself is finally destroyed. I think I've missed a page there. Prepare itself for habit. Is obviously so created that it will crumble to nothing when a new plate is required or the planet itself is finally destroyed. Trapped inside the plates lined with clay, which like a piece of domestic china is fired with a sort of thick glass glaze, is several feet of solid gold, which helps to keep the temperatures, which differ in all the different regions of the planet, perfectly stable. Should they become too high, this gold will begin to melt and run into the vessels beneath the plates. If the heat becomes too great, the plate may explode and cause an earthquake somewhere in the world. As the plates gradually wear out or are destroyed, new ones that have been growing beneath the old ones come forward to replace them, rather in the same way as children grow their adult teeth. And this way, as the plates are continually replaced, some lumps of gold and other metals, precious stones, find their way out to the rivers and in the outcrops of the earth. In the main, nothing is wasted, and all these building substances are reused constantly. So wonderfully and intricately are these plates created, threaded through almost certainly similarly as the human body is threaded through with veins and arteries, dotted here and there with points of glittering precious stones which keep the planet together, but when necessary will explode into a million tiny fragments that the rest of the living planet, like the rest of the living planet. Anyone who wishes to get some idea of how our egg-shaped planet works should try an experiment with 3 balloons, each one inside the other and filled with water, tied with a string and hanging on a washing line outside in the garden, so as to avoid water possibly dripping all over the inside or dripping all over an inside carpeted floor. It will be seen that the balloons automatically revolve of their own accord. Try placing lumps of sticky plasticine on the outsides of the balloons. The balloons will begin to revolve with far greater difficulty. After weighing the plasticine or modelling clay, whatever is available, take some sand which weighs exactly the same as the lumps of modelling material. Remove the modelling material from the outer surface of the balloon, paint sticky glue over the entire surface of the balloons and cover with sand. The water-filled globe will move about as well as it does without the added weight of the sand, because it is spread evenly over the surface. It is now considered more expedient to build huge multi-story buildings in new cities rising up all over the world, and more gradually earthquakes are beginning to happen and will increase unless this sort of building comes to an end, and new lighter weight 4-story buildings replace these monstrous blots on the Earth's precious surface. Huge motorways, vast dams, all these things will gradually bring disaster to this earth. Go back to the simple experiment with the modelling clay and the sand. The thinly spread sand the globe could cope with, but the huge lumpy weights it could not. What does any vehicle powered by an engine do if you overload it? Its engine strains and struggles to work and usually becomes overheated and stops. Likewise, the Earth's motivating mechanisms eventually begin to become stressed and overheated. So it sends a message for help to its many computers who open up the poles of the Earth and the depths of the sea for cooling waters. If this doesn't work, drastic action may be taken to rid the planet of the offending lump or lumps by storm, earthquake, giant winds, rolling flame, or whatever is necessary to spread all this dangerous weight evenly around the Earth's surface. And these will continue until the equilibrium is once more restored. Although we feel that it is far too complicated to consider much the possibility of not only a third, fourth, and maybe even a fifth structure to this amazing universe, it is known that humanoid creatures, which are definitely not human, inhabit various regions of the central fiery workings of all planets to keep a constant watch on computer dials that are constantly working, and many other needs of the planet in much the same way as a large ship must have people working down below to keep the ship working. Scientists watching planet Venus on the pictures sent back by their space module could not understand why there were no evidence of earthquakes. This is easily understood when it is realized that most earthquakes are caused not only in the creation of a living inhabited planet, as seas are being formed, but very much later in the planet's working life, as various humanities place impossible stresses and strains on their planet, and corrective steps have to be taken. Venus has obviously never been inhabited like very many other planets similar, as it bears none of the scars of habitation like planet Earth. We cannot repeat too often whilst writing this book that humanity only believes that something is there if it can be seen. Electricity, now accepted as a normal part of daily life, was thought to be the work of the devil by people in ancient times because they could not see how it could work. All manner of extraordinary creatures work all over the universe who are completely invisible not only to the living on your structure but to us on our structure also. What then must we do to save this planet for ourselves? Because part of this message must be the realization that if we do nothing, we shall all be back here in future lives just in time to live through the Holocaust that will inevitably have begun by then. There is one very good thing that we do have here in England, and certainly in other countries also, and that is the Gardens at Kew, founded by George III, who was a very deep-thinking man. And I haven't got the rest of it. So anyway, that's that. And I've also got this thing about the planets here, which I've just flipped over, the planets. The planets of Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and many others visible from this planet Earth are dead planets, or to name them more correctly, worlds lying fallow between the civilizations that have inhabited them, and will in centuries to come inhabit them again. The long straight line visible on the surface of Mars is the remains of a vast canal, waterway and dam constructed by a civilization that once lived there. There are millions of other such planets uninhabited and lying fallow in this galaxy and others. The powers of creation that have control of the universe farm the planet in much the same way as a good farmer does his land. And once a planet has been contaminated by its inhabitants or rendered unsuitable to support further life, it must remain fallow and empty for not less than 1 million years, submitted to weather and elements of all kinds until it once more healthy and life-giving. Some planets are never used again and become something similar to the Earth's moon that gives light by night and serves other purposes in the universe. There are some civilizations within this galaxy and in others who have managed to progress to a very high degree of understanding and have moved whole civilizations from one dying planet to another, carefully prepared, possessed of a suitable climate and vegetation. Such humanities as this are well aware of the dangers of interfering with the proper order of creation, and carry out such plans with the greatest care only after a great deal of study, such an operation would take more than 100 years to bring about. And there's a question answer here. Question: has our humanity, or parts of it, been brought here by other higher civilizations in prehistory, as suggested by von Däniken and other writers? And the answer to that is certain things must remain a mystery. This mankind evolved from early ape-like man, though not an ape, as some have suggested. This evolution comes about over a period of 1 million years or more by a careful mutation of the genes. Migration from one planet to another only happens where an old and advanced civilization finds a suitable empty planet near at hand to its own, a planet which furthermore moves in exactly the same timescale as its own. There are some other planets and other inhabitants who not only look very different to this Earth's humanity, but exist on an entirely different timescale. Such different time-scale humans could never visit this planet, although they have and do send their computerized space modules here. Never would it be possible for people from this humanity to visit them. Any such attempt could only end in death. As to a general understanding of the inhabitants of the planets and all the different and various galaxies in the universe, it must be understood that there are many other planets almost exactly similar to this Earth. That is to say, a planet moving around its sun in approximately 365 days, making up a calendar year with the 12 calendar months of the year. An Earth which also has its sun and moon and stars and as has this Earth. Its inhabitants live to exactly the same timescale. All the elements in the universe are the same, earth and water and the basic chemical elements of which they are made up. There are differences brought about by the atmospheric circumstances not found in this Earth, but where the planets are similar or exactly similar, their inhabitants are the same. These are humanities or humanoid beings, that is to say, beings whose appearance is, or to all intents and purposes, similar to those in this planet, but who have the power to transmit themselves spiritually and are part physical and part spiritual. They are a very highly advanced form of physical being and live on a totally different time scale and type of planet. This humanity might make contact with them in centuries to come, as they are the humanity that has made contact with Uri Geller and his colleagues, but it would never be possible to make any physical contact with them or to visit their planet. If it were possible for the humanity that lives in this planet Earth to meet physically and directly members of other humanities from other planets, humanities that have progressed in wisdom and understanding of the creative power that controls the entire universe, and of all things both physical and spiritual, the people of this Earth would immediately perceive the great beauty of higher humanities, especially of their women, for all humanity is made male and female, and lives in the same structure of family society, ordained and decided by God for all his people. For the human face, moulded in flesh, distorts itself continually as the thoughts and images behind it have their effect. Very few of those in this earth's humanity have thoughts that do not distort and disfigure even amongst its most beautiful of women, as few have the understanding, knowledge, wisdom, and faith to bring this about. So, as peoples of this world, those who would wish to have a deeper understanding of all the different humanities that have peopled this planet must first look at this humanity, which began after the age of ice. There were a few primitive people left in certain parts of the world's surface, but none of the educated peoples had survived. This humanity is 1 million years old. Everyone knows that the oldest histories are in the East, in China, Japan, Egypt, and even those are not more than a few thousand years old. 1,000 years in the physical life of one man is a long time, but in the evolution of planets it is nothing. Looking again at this history, what mention is there of anything but the most primitive of life, transportation only by vehicles drawn by horses or oxen, writing and reading, the receipt of all learning of all kind, idol worship, beautiful art, even sumptuous and lovely architecture and building of high science and deep knowledge, nothing. The only men of any kind of advanced knowledge were the soothsayers, prophets, magicians, apothecaries, and most of what they thought they knew was nothing more than a mixture of their own thoughts and the ideas placed in their minds by divine power. Even as short a time ago as 100 years ago, a very little time, many people would have been amazed at the technical advances, both in transport, medicine, weaponry. Could they have seen what has now become available to mankind in this planet, most would have been completely incredulous, and even at the dawn of the first simple motor car, refused to believe that the noble horse could ever be superseded as a means of vehicular travel. As to flight, aircraft such as there are now, they would have found difficult to understand. So there the intelligent inquirer can have an idea of the length of time it takes a humanity made up of simple souls who live again and again to come to knowledge, understanding in all fields. Even in this length of time, they still cannot understand how to arrange a world towards peace and prosperity. They still cannot learn the simple basic understanding of their Creator. They still look only to violence as a means of imposing their will on another, not arbitration, negotiation, and true exploitation of commerce, which must be the only way to peace. After the first humanity had all but destroyed the beautiful world after the flood, after the Ice Age in which no living thing could survive, the earth remained fallow for a further 1 million years until it was time to begin to people the earth. In the beginning, a simple people. Many believe that the first men looked not unlike the ape or large monkey was of the same family, but this was never so. No monkey is ever equipped with the humanity, only man himself. So it is that in 1 million years from the first man, whose intelligence is of the lowest, to those of today in this planet, who are capable of understanding in many things, you have the time it takes for a humanity to evolve, 1 million years. Some humanities never completely evolve, but destroy themselves long before they can come to understanding of any kind, which could permit of a real progression to knowledge. Right, I have to stop there for a bit.